This video is going to be a reaction and an abbreviated film study look at Drew Petzing's offense. I'll be honest with you, I'm only 3 games in as far as studying what he's done in 2025 and 2024. So I have to tell you that, based on my own procedure and the standard that I have for myself, it's still too soon for me to provide you with what I would consider a comprehensive look. I actually do have a little bit more experience with observing his offense, unbeknownst to me, in fact. One in 2023, an important game, and then 2025. I'll show a little bit of data here as far as his tight end usage. I think that's been a big talking point. I know that it caught a lot of us by surprise, myself included, when they hired him because there was no announcement that he was being interviewed. I guess because it was a lateral move. A couple of observations. There's a lot of jumbo 11 and even jumbo 13 personnel groups. So maybe that sets up perfectly for Dan Skipper to return. I don't know if that was the plan there, but that's just a side note. My main exposure to the Petzing offense comes from 2 specific games, both of which involve Mike Macdonald. The first of which, I guess technically 3, but the first of which is the Baltimore Ravens trip to Arizona in 2023. Of course, that season we had a historic defense under Mike Macdonald, right? Seattle plays the Cardinals twice a year because they're in the same division. So I have direct knowledge of that matchup in a similar way. In fact, it's kind of eerily similar. So I'm going to review those 2 games briefly here as far as my observations, then give you some data for 2025 and 2024, and then finish off with, I think, 4 plays that just gives a little bit of an idea of how similar his offensive attack looks, at least to me on first glance, to Ben Johnson. So 2023, the Ravens won a game against Arizona, 31-24. It was in Week 8, in fact, literally 7 days after Baltimore had dismantled the Lions in Baltimore 38-6, right? In that game in Arizona, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense, so they scored 17 points in the fourth quarter. They kicked a field goal with like 30 seconds left to get within 7, actually had an onside kick thereafter that Baltimore was fortunately able to recover. I think it's important for me to mention, because there's some, maybe disappointment's not the right word, but confusion, surprise with the hiring maybe. Petzing had interviewed, but it was not announced. So all of those connections that he has to Detroit, to Hank Fraley, to Ben Johnson, weren't revealed until the announcement. The announcement of his hiring, I should say, as offensive coordinator actually happened. He had coached with Hank Fraley, I think, for 3 or maybe 4 years directly. Apparently was in Ben Johnson's wedding after they had coached together at Boston College, so that's, kind of random. At minimum, he's extremely familiar with the staff that is there now and the type of offense that they run. And Hank Fraley, and then obviously the previous offensive coordinator. Well, John Morton was the previous offensive coordinator. I mean, Ben Johnson up until 2024. Let me get back to my other exposure to his offense and kind of turn or twist what is commonly accepted as the evaluation, that he'll have a solid run game, but won't be able to advance the pass game, because I've heard that a lot. So the Seahawks, the same Seattle Seahawks that are still alive right now in the playoffs in 2025, this season, they went to Arizona in Week 4, and they jumped out to a 20-3 or 20-6 lead, with like 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Here's what Mike Macdonald and the Seahawks defense had done so far to that point, with a little over 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Again, it's a Week 4 game in Arizona. 9 possessions for the Cardinals, 44 plays, 147 yards. That included 4 punts, 2 interceptions, 2 field goals. So you're talking about, from a points per drive standpoint, 6 points for Arizona through 9 possessions, and they were averaging only 3.34 yards per play. Thereafter, after falling behind by 14, Arizona's offense promptly goes 8 plays, 73 yards, touchdown in a little less than 4 minutes. And then after a missed field goal by Seattle that probably would have put things away, 12 plays, 57 yards, touchdown to tie it at 20 on a short pass from Kyler Murray to running back Mercado with about 30 seconds left in the game. I mentioned that dynamic, or that point, the touchdown pass to the running back, because what I do think I see is a really well-developed pass game to the running backs and the tight ends. Now, in that particular game I'm talking about, Week 4, once Arizona tied it, Sam Darnold and Jackson Smith and Jigba, they connected on a 22-yard pass. and that set up Jason Myers for a game-winning field goal. And the Seahawks escaped 23-20. The rematch in Seattle later this year was a complete blowout, 44-22 in the Seahawks' favor. But those two games that I'm talking about, right, the Baltimore visit to Arizona in 2023, Week 8, that they pulled out 31-24, and then the 23-20 victory for the Seahawks this year. In those two games, going against Mike Macdonald, recognized as one of the best 2 or 3 defensive play callers that there is in the NFL right now. Drew Petzing's offense, when they needed it in the fourth quarter, they scored a combined 31 points by throwing the football primarily with Kyler Murray. Is this some of it against softer coverages? For sure. I actually remember those two games and remember being extremely frustrated as a Ravens fan, like all of a sudden we can't stop them at all. The same dynamic happened this year in Week 4 in Arizona. I think Petzing deserves a serious look. I'm trying to give you one. I will have some film, like I said, to show you a little bit later on. My point in bringing up those two games was I didn't even realize that I had some awareness and exposure to his offense because I didn't know the name of the guy who was calling the plays in either one of those scenarios. We do now because he's hired in Detroit. He's the offensive coordinator. If you're looking for me to make it a definitive statement about whether I approve or disapprove of the hiring, first of all, you shouldn't be relying on me for that. Second of all, I can't and I won't do that right now. I still have the pass game to go through from a downfield passing game standpoint. I mean, independent of play action stuff or concepts into the boundary. In any case, let me go over a little bit of data here to give you guys. And this is from 2025. I grabbed this from Sumer Sports. 2025 was not good for run game production in Arizona, right? They were at 93 yards per game, which was 31st in the NFL. What you guys see here is personnel tendency stuff for 2025. Of course, the top 3, I'm sure, has been talked about a lot, or you guys have some awareness of it. 11, 12, and then 13 personnel usage. 13 personnel usage being, number 1 in the NFL, I think, at 15.64%. Or maybe it was number 2 in the league. I could be wrong there. But from what you should expect standpoint, a guy who you have data for a 3-year period was able to consistently produce a solid run game. That's been emphasized by many people, better than myself at getting things out quickly and or analyzing the game. 2025 doesn't fit there, right? Because the 31st in the NFL in rushing yards per game. But backtrack 1 year and then 2. 2024, 7th in the league at 144 per game. And then 2023, 139 rushing yards per game, or 3rd overall. If you look at the progression, it's not good, but I think they had an offensive line coach and run game coordinator leave after 2024 that did a great job. I think that you as a Lions fan or anyone who's got a balanced perspective, you have Hank Fraley here in Detroit, Penei Sewell, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Dan Campbell wants to run the football. I feel confident in saying that this guy is going to be able to put the run game in an advantageous position. Hopefully, David Montgomery is back for 2026. It'd be a great asset to have both of those guys. That's the strong point, the relative strength of what Petzing's scheme and play calling appears to offer, right? Run game production. I think that's obvious from the stats, even though 2025 film, doesn't necessarily line up with that. My point in all of this, tying in the data that I'm showing you in the 2 games that I referenced as my first times watching or paying attention to his play calling, even though I didn't know his name at the time, the Ravens visit there in 2023, Seattle's 23-20 win this year. Both of those situations, Mike Macdonald, the best defensive play caller in the NFL, got scorched in the fourth quarter while Petzing is calling plays for Kyler Murray. Jared Goff's going to be a huge upgrade, right? So will Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams. Sam Laporta, I know, is coming off of a serious injury, and compared to the production that Petzing got out of Trey McBride, people may say that's a downgrade. Fine, whatever you want to call it. Most people will say that it's not an upgrade, but you and I know what Sam Laporta is, A, capable of if he's healthy, and then B, if you kind of switch their roles or switch their locations, I should say, stuck Sam Laporta in Arizona, Trey McBride in Detroit, you probably get an exchange of production that looks similar to what actually happened in reality in the end. I think I actually had 2024 data displayed there. So here's the 25 data you can see that's still talking about from an 11 personnel standpoint. In 25, 46% usage versus 56%. That's the column second from all the way over to the right for you guys. 56% for 11 personnel would be the league average. He was only at 46%. So clearly, whether we're talking about 2025 data or 2024, which I just put up on the screen right here, he's well below the expected 11 personnel usage, compared to the rest of the league. Now, my point, or what I would choose to focus on rather, is that he's going to have increased talent here everywhere, except tight end. Like I said, call it a draw, whatever you want to. It doesn't really matter to me. I certainly don't think that McBride is like a guy who's 2 levels better than Laporta. In fact, I think Laporta is the better blocker. That's pretty obvious, number one. Number two, Laporta is a guy who you can line up at receiver, and he can be effective against starting caliber outside corners, just like Trey McBride was as well. Overall, huge upgrade in talent for a guy who's only 38 years old. And he already has 3 years experience as an offensive coordinator at the NFL level. In this situation, it's possible, I'm not saying this is what I believe, but it's possible that Dan Campbell is early, but he's still right. In that you've got a guy with this level of experience who's got a unique path to the NFL, let's be honest. He played at Middlebury, which, if you don't know, they got great athletics programs there. Specifically in lacrosse, but it's Division III level, really high-level athletic programs across the board. Petzing played, I think, DB there, had his career cut short by injury, ended up working some volunteer jobs there, and then I think at Harvard, moved on to Boston College, where I believe that's where he coached with Ben Johnson. Spent a season at Yale as an outside linebacker coach. So very unique experience, or diverse already, right? Middlebury, Harvard, Boston College, Yale, all in the northeast portion of the country. And I think, if I read it correctly, degrees in economics, math, and philosophy, which is an interesting mix if you know anything about the content of college math versus college philosophy classes. But in any case, he moves on to the NFL at some point, goes to the Vikings, Browns, or I think Browns, Vikings, and then back to the Browns for a year. I think he may have been 2022, he would not have been Baker Mayfield's quarterback coach. That's the wrong year. He was the tight end coach, 20 and 21 when Baker was there, playing quarterback. And then the season that Baker Mayfield leaves, 22, where Baker Mayfield split the year between Carolina and the Rams, that's the Deshaun Watson year. So Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett, I should say, are in Cleveland. So he has dealt with some real adverse situations, if you ask me, as far as the quarterbacks. Kyler Murray in Arizona, coaching Deshaun Watson for a year or a portion of the year. I will say this, 2024, Murray throws for, I think, 21 or 23 touchdowns, somewhere in that range, 3,800 yards. That was the second year that Petzing was the offensive coordinator. Now, am I saying this is the guy that I wanted in Detroit for you guys? No way. I would have preferred Mike McDaniel, clearly. He's a guy with tremendous creativity and some production that proves it, right? But if I read some of the data correctly, I think it might have been Pride of Detroit or somewhere else. 2025, Arizona's offense actually produced more yards and points than Miami's. I may be wrong there. It's just something that I picked up earlier this morning trying to get some reading done. I wanted to have this out earlier from a film study standpoint. I will show 4 plays here in a moment, very few. I have the film cut. I would like to prove it by showing some film here at the end, but I just don't feel like my procedure is not succinct. In order for me to get something out for a YouTube video that'll go through, basically that YouTube will not hit and remove any monetization of, it takes a significant amount of time to do, I guess, what you would call pre-edit and put annotations on the screen to kind of give you guys information, number one, and also break up that process. I mean, at some point, I'd like to move completely to Patreon content, but I just don't have enough people over there. I'm not complaining about it. I've been absolutely blessed by Lions fans, Ravens fans, Seahawks fans, whatever. I'm just saying that to show you the film would have probably pushed this video back to like late this evening, which is, at this point, it's already late. I'm behind, or was behind, on Arizona film being cut. I did have those 2 additional games, Baltimore in 23, Seattle earlier this year. I got them against the Jags and the Bucks in consecutive weeks. So we'll show those here in a moment. Basically, you've got Week 12 and Week 13 of this year. So it's later in the season, once they've already moved away from Kyler Murray. They lose to Jacksonville 27-24 in a close game, and then I think 20-17 loss to the Bucks in overtime. I do have significant amount of film from the Seattle win in week 4. I probably will do a separate standalone video on that. That's, of course, the one that I mentioned earlier where Arizona ties it at 20 after a second touchdown from Kyler Murray to a running back. I think it's Edwin DeMercado. And then, unfortunately, Arizona's kicker doesn't land the ball in the landing zone. And then the Seahawks get the ball on the 40-yard line. One big completion to JSN later. Jason Myers is kicking the game-tying field goal. I do have some plays to go over here, like I said. And they really do line up with some things that Detroit did already from a scheme and formation standpoint. But from a quarterback timing standpoint, what the quarterback recognizes, how quickly they get the football out, this is going to be night and day difference for Petzing, in my opinion, from pretty much everyone that he's dealt with, dating back to Deshaun Watson, Jacoby Brissett twice now, in fact, Josh Dobbs, and even Kyler Murray. That'll be the biggest upgrade, in my opinion, as well as the building and the organization that he's walking into. I think the offense is already existing here. I suspect that the play calls are the same, meaning they have the exact same terminology, but I'll wait to offer some opinion on that until the end. So here's the 4 plays that I picked. This is a game opener against the Jags in Week 12. First play of the game, first quarter, you got formation into the boundary. So what I mean by that is you got 3 receivers into the boundary and a running back. It took me probably until the middle of the third quarter of the second game to say, okay, I'm satisfied that he appears to be focusing on the boundary with the same propensity that Ben Johnson did. And I use that name in a hesitant manner because of how effective he was in Detroit. And of course, things worked out differently in 2025. Dan Campbell had to take over play calling duties. But this motion, I think, from the field to the boundary, in my opinion, they know the coverage they're going to get. So it ends up being you could call it an innocuous tight end screen. I think that Petzing and Brissett as well know they're going to get man on 1 and man on 2 here, and that's going to open up the availability for this tight end screen. Tight end with a little chip, and you can see the inside linebackers are getting depth here and here, like zone openings. I think you basically got a split field coverage here where you've got zone look from all of these guys, and then man into the boundary. That's typical at the NFL level or many levels of football. Teams end up playing man into the boundary, and I think that Petzing is just onto him here. He knows what he's going to get. Again, this isn't just a drive starter. This is a game starter. The outside receiver is just running this corner off, and then offensive lineman is going to go block the safety who is assigned to McBride. Easy ability to get the ball to an athlete in space. This is very reminiscent, in my opinion, of Ben Johnson type stuff. And again, I have the highest level of respect for what he's able to do as a play caller and a designer and a game plan standpoint. The difference is obviously their reliance on 12 versus 13 personnel is not the same, right? There's a lot of similarities with the ability and the willingness to attack into the boundary, and that's kind of what I'm focusing on here. Standard under center play action stuff, right, is what you're going to get here. This is early in the game against the Bucs. Again, the ball is on the right hash, and that's going to be the attack point, or I should say the boundary is going to be the attack point. It's really not hard to find under center play action stuff with the Arizona film. In a lot of other NFL teams, offenses, or even college, like think of last night, the national championship game, Indiana's never under center, or very rarely, right? So there's just a dynamic where certain people don't go under center at all. I think Petzing knows what he's going to get. He's 13 personnel here, so you've got, I think, 3 tight ends up to the top side, 1 X receiver, 1 running back. So the 3 tight ends are set up into the boundary, and he knows he's going to get this 6-2 look, and that kind of locks Tampa Bay in to certain coverages. Nice little insert scheme between the tight ends up to the top side. We're talking about these 2 guys here. Watch how they kind of get this accomplished, this insert. So the inside tight end is stepping to the edge defender, and then the outside tight end is inserting into that space. He ends up running a vertical. Backside receiver, the X, I think that's Wilson, who's pretty talented if you ask me, now that I've watched some more of their film. And then the boot off the play action by Brissett into the boundary. It's a short completion to McBride, but the idea here is that early in the game, he seems quite willing to get into certain personnel groups / formations and then, be able to predict the coverage easily for the quarterback. There is this dynamic where I feel like sometimes Brissett is a little bit later getting the football out than Jared Goff will be, to be honest with you, but this is just quintessential play action concept into the boundary that gives, easy access to the quarterback to get some consistent and predictable or reliable yards. Back to the Week 12 game, and now we've got 4 to the field. So we're talking about 3 receivers here, and the running back, they're all to the top side of this blue line. So when I say to the field, that's what I mean. Think a mirror image of the first play that I showed you, right, where you had 3 receivers down here and the running back set to that same side into the boundary. So you're going to get same concept, a wheel by the man who went in motion, the receiver, except this looks like to me he's quite aware of where the football is going to go. And the intended receiver is not the tight end, it's the running back. I love this play because the running back is set up to the field, and then he's crossing into the boundary. It seems very obvious to me that they're trying to attack the boundary side inside linebacker. I think it's Devin Lloyd, who had a great year this year, don't get me wrong, but it seems pretty obvious to me that they're trying to go after him, force him to expand. So you're getting the receiver crossing the quarterback's face, McBride, a little bit higher concept, trying to get him to expand or maybe deal with this tight end route such they can just flip it out to the running back into the flats. Easy access stuff. The downfield passing game, I'll try to focus on that in some other videos, to be honest with you. This was quicker for me to get done with. I do have at this point like 34 plays saved up, and it's just too much. I get to the point where I save too many plays. But where is this play going? Into the boundary. Who are you getting it to? An athlete, a running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, right? That's the idea. And then you have a receiver who's coached well to go ahead and try to at least front up the outside corner. There's a whole lot of guys there. Devin Lloyd is the first player to make contact. The point is, it's some common areas of attack, the boundary, quickly. Again, very reminiscent of Ben Johnson. I'm still very early in the conceptual analysis. It's less obvious to handle or gather that, to be honest with you, than it is stuff like this, basically, where the ball is going. One of my favorite plays here is very similar to a mesh concept. So a mesh, if you don't know, involves 2 drags, underneath drags. This route actually here is not accurate, to be honest with you. That's not the route that the tight end runs. I did that, for illustration purposes, because it's actually the running back who runs the other portion of the mesh route. And this is Jahmyr Gibbs stuff. I like the pass game to the running backs. There's this intentional aspect of getting the ball to the running backs against linebackers. I know we kind of heard the same thing from a John Morton standpoint last year, but it's very well designed. First of all, you've got the outside receiver up here is running all. Technically, it's the stacked receiver, so it's number 4. I think that's Dortch. We'll pull this back so you can see what I mean. When I say stacked receiver, it's the number 1, the front receiver who's on the line versus Wilson, who's off. Wilson is the guy who's running the drag, so they are just occupying the outside corner and the field side safety. Both of those guys get occupied by this route. So when this mesh works out and the running back goes underneath of Wilson, essentially you're talking about a pick or a rub concept. When he goes underneath of that, the linebacker, Foye Oluokun, really spectacular football player, has got a long way to go, number 1. Number 2, he's at, an agility or maybe burst deficit trying to get out there to the running back. The quarterback had to navigate some pressure. That's why the ball is a little bit late here. If you ask me, I think it's Josh Hines Allen down here getting some pressure on him, maybe walking that tackle back into his vision as Brissett looks down into the boundary. It's really well designed. It's one of the things that I see with this offense. Again, there's the corner and the safety that are occupied by number 1 or the guy who was stacked. Easy access for the quarterback, up to the top side to the running back. I like that aspect of this pass game so far. I know it's very limited film, only showing 4 plays. I do have a couple of other things I'd like to display, but in order to get this accomplished this afternoon, I had to kind of cut it there. I do have a suspicion or a theory here. I think that the terminology is the same or very similar. Goff can make changes quickly. He's been doing that for years under Ben Johnson, and did that this past year under Morton, and then Dan Campbell. I think you want to retain that ability as much as possible. If you went to totally, and I could be wrong here, there could be information that comes out or has come out already that disproves this, so I recognize that. The only thing that makes sense to me is that Dan Campbell knows the terminology the words, the phrases used, maybe even the timing or the teaching points are the same. And so I would suspect that that's, and look, again, I could be really wrong, but I think that is a huge, if that is true, that is a huge upgrade, or excuse me, a huge positive to hiring someone like this, in that him and Goff and Dan Campbell and the rest of the players would start by speaking the same language. Am I saying that John Morton came in with different terminology? No, I think his was the same as well. What I'm saying is my suspicion is that Dan Campbell didn't want himself and everyone else to have to learn a whole new set of terminology and checks and reasons why or how they change play calls on the field so that players kind of hit the ground running, if you will, when they came in. And I could be drastically wrong there. I know that Petzing spent time in Cleveland with Stefanski and other guys as well, Minnesota. I like the hiring from that perspective. If that is true, if he's going to bring with him a new system, new terminology, new formations. Some people use numbers, some people use words, some people use a combination of the two. Some people use words that are really outlandish or out of left field. If he's going to come in with a whole new language and a whole new terminology, then I would have some questions. If there is this alignment of systems, or if it's the same exact system, then I would say I can see the vision. I do like the play calls after having rewatched that Baltimore game in 2023, the fourth quarter, and Seattle in week 4 of this season, the fourth quarter only. In each case, the ability to switch gears. Now, some would say, well, both of those teams are probably playing prevent, maybe on the first touchdown, but not the second score or the third in Baltimore's case in 2023. They gave up 17 points to Kyler Murray and Petzing in the fourth quarter. That was a furious comeback. It was one that was really frustrating. I remember doing the reaction video after that one and telling Ravens fans, look, if we can't go in and finish this team off, when we were up huge, then we should have no expectation to win a Super Bowl. I wasn't as frustrated with the Seattle game in week 4. Maybe because I haven't rooted for the Seahawks nearly as long as I've rooted for the Ravens. And B, my expectations at that point, week 4 for Seattle, weren't as high as it was for Baltimore in week 8 of 2023. Like I said, keep in mind that was 7 days after the Ravens had defeated Detroit 38-6. My point is, Petzing appears like a guy who can switch gears if he needs to, number one. Number two, I wonder what help, if any, he had 2025 from other coaches on the staff in terms of either A, making changes during a game, or from a game planning standpoint. In Detroit, he'll have a ton of help from players, Jared Goff, coaches, Dan Campbell, Hank Fraley. I am leaning towards, being extremely supportive of this signing. It's a long time before we can make any type of evaluations on it. I'm not in that position at all to be able to tell you what to think, nor am I interested in doing so. What I like to do is study the film, tell you what I think I see. And even though I've studied significant film, probably more than most of you who are listening right now, at this point, even though I've studied a significant amount, I'm still not comfortable talking about the pass game in a way that is evaluative versus some of the other things that I pointed out here. Similarities in formation and attack points or attack areas into the boundary, ability early in the game to know what coverage he's going to get and how to attack it, utilization of the running backs in the pass game, to me, appears to be an obvious focus of his play calls during the game. So from that standpoint, I'm interested in A, what other people are saying. In our Lions Discord, the immediate reaction probably skewed a little bit more towards the negative. And then things, I think, balanced out as more information came out. Part of that was because his initial interview was essentially kept in secret because I think it's a lateral move. In any case, if you guys enjoyed this video, which was mostly commentary and some film study as well, then please let me know in the comment section, number one. Number two, if you have other suggestions for ways to examine this in a more concise way, feel free to let me know in the comment section. And finally, if you think other Lions fans would like to hear my thoughts on the matter as well as a little bit of film that I displayed, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.